Welcome to the deep dive. We are going straight to the sources today, focusing on a figure whose name is, well, it's synonymous with sheer creative force.
Mhm.
But his life was arguably one of the messiest, most anguished, and just chaotic of any great master. We are diving deep into Ludwig van Beethoven.
And when we talk about Beethoven, we're really talking about a hinge point in music history. He is the pivotal figure.
The one who connects it all.
Exactly. He takes the formal perfection and discipline of the classical era, the world of his teachers, Haydn and Mozart, and then just fueled by this intense personal suffering and a terrifying determination, he launches music headlong into romanticism.
That is the core mission today, isn't it? We're not just tracing a biography.
Yeah.
We're using the extensive research you provided to track the war that Beethoven waged against his own fate. Our sources cover his entire life, from his baptism in Bonn, December 17th, 1770, all the way through to his death on March 26, 1827. He was only 56.
And a roadmap for this is that established three-period structure of his genius.
The early, middle, and late phases.
Right. Because that framework lets us see so clearly how the critical turning points in his life, his move to Vienna, the crippling onset of deafness, and then those final years of just monumental introspection, they didn't just happen around his music.
No, they drove it.
They drove its radical evolution. He was a composer and, critically, a virtuoso pianist. Until fate stole his primary tool. We're going to track the triumphs and the total collapses.
Okay, so let's unpack this chaotic beginning in Bonn, a town that now, of course, proudly houses the Beethoven House Museum. The sources immediately introduce this huge element of complexity, this shadow of his illustrious grandfather.
You really have to start with the grandfather,
Yeah.
also named Ludwig van Beethoven. He set the professional standard.
He was the benchmark.
He was the benchmark. Highly successful, served as the Kapellmeister, that's the principal music director, and a respected bass singer in Bonn. He'd moved there from Mechlin, which is in modern-day Belgium. This was high society, and the sources emphasize that the grandfather's portrait was a literal talisman for the composer. He kept it his whole life, this constant reminder of the musical pedigree he was expected to uphold.
A standard his own father couldn't meet.
Utterly failed to meet. And that leads us right to his father, Johann, a tenor, who provided Ludwig's first music tuition.
And the accounts make it sound less like instruction and more like sheer domestic abuse.
How harsh doesn't even begin to cover it. The tuition was relentless. Starting when Ludwig was tiny, Johann was focused on exploitation. He was just desperate to replicate the financial success Leopold Mozart had with Wolfgang.
So it was all about money.
All about money. The training was so intensive, often with these irregular late-night sessions where the young Beethoven was literally dragged out of bed to practice. The sources say it routinely reduced the young boy to tears.
Wow.
It was, to put it mildly, a trauma-informed education.
And Johann's ambition, it even extended to outright lying, didn't it? The whole child prodigy narrative required some fudging of the numbers.
He absolutely fudged them. For Ludwig's first public performance in March of 1778, his father claimed the boy was 6 years old.
When he was really 7.
He was 7. It was just this early, desperate attempt to market him. And this pressure, this attempt to force genius, it's in such stark opposition to the self-driven mastery Beethoven eventually achieved.
What really stands out to me in the sources as a truly jaw-dropping nugget is the contradiction between his musical ability and, well, his basic academic skills.
It's incredible.
A musical genius who was completely inept at math.
It speaks volumes about how specialized genius can be. The sources confirm it. His musical capabilities just far outstripped his math skills. He went to a Latin preparatory school, learned basic addition, but he never mastered division or multiplication.
So how did he manage?
Well, for instance, if he needed to multiply, say, 16 by 7, he couldn't use a multiplication table. He had to perform the calculation by literally adding up columns of numbers. He'd add 7 together 16 times.
You're kidding.
He used this column addition method to simulate multiplication his entire adult life. It's a fascinating mental shortcut that just reveals a complete lack of aptitude for abstract numbers outside of music.
That detail really grounds the legend, doesn't it? So, moving into his teenage years, some real professional guidance finally arrives with Christian Gottlob Neef.
Neef was the first true structural influence, starting around 1780. He saw the boy's talent and became his most important composition teacher in Bonn. And crucially, Neef gave him a professional start.
Right.
He used his connections to publish Beethoven's first work in 1783, a set of keyboard variations.
And Neef quickly put him to work, I gather.
Oh, yes. Beethoven served as Neef's assistant organist for the court chapel. unpaid at first in 1782, but then he started getting a salary in 1784. This exposed him to the refined tastes and repertoire of the court, giving him the grounding he desperately needed.
But the real personal salvation, it came from outside the music world with the von Breuning family.
They were his refuge. The von Breunings were an upper-class, educated family who saw the desperate situation at home, with his father, Johann, just sinking further and further into alcoholism. The widowed mother, Helene von Breuning, she effectively became a second mother to him. She offered the emotional stability and moral compass that was just completely absent in his own home.
And it sounds like they offered him more than just emotional support. They taught him how to function in society.
They really did. They taught him refined manners. They nurtured his interest in literature and intellectual pursuits, things Johann could never provide. They gave him an entry into the cultural world of Bonn's elite. And through them, he met critical patrons.
Like Count Ferdinand von Waldstein.
Waldstein was essential. He was a friend and a financial supporter who believed absolutely in Beethoven's future. He's the one who commissioned Beethoven's first work for the stage, a ballet, in 1791. These aristocratic connections were the scaffolding that let him climb from court musician in Bonn to independent artist in Vienna.
And the path to Vienna wasn't just artistic ambition, was it? It was also driven by this stark family crisis. His father's alcoholism forced him into a provider role.
It was a brutal maturity. When his mother died in July 1787, the decline just accelerated. By 1789, the court had to intervene, recognizing Johann's incapacity.
Wow.
They ordered that half of his court pension be paid directly to Ludwig so he could support his two younger brothers.
So at just 18, he's the head of the household.
The head of the household, supplementing this income by teaching and playing viola in the court orchestra, which ironically was valuable exposure. He was encountering works by Gluck and Mozart there.
The stage was set for his departure, but the final confirmation came through a meeting with Joseph Haydn.
Yes, Haydn passed through Bonn twice, once in late 1790 and then critically in July 1792 on his return from London. And it was during that second stop that the arrangements were finalized. Beethoven would go to Vienna, the musical capital, and study with the world's greatest living composer.
And that leads us to Count Waldstein's quote. It's the ultimate summary of the promise and the pressure of this move.
It's one of the most profound quotes in music history. Waldstein knew the legacy Beethoven was about to inherit, and he told him, "You are going to Vienna in fulfillment of your long frustrated wishes. With the help of assiduous labor, you shall receive Mozart's spirit from Haydn's hands."
That was his mission.
That was his mission. He left Bonn in November 1792, and his father died shortly after, closing that incredibly difficult chapter permanently.
So Beethoven arrives in Vienna, a city just buzzing with musical talent and aristocratic support, but it's also under the shadow of the French Revolutionary Wars. And the first thing he does is, surprisingly, very disciplined.
Yeah.
He commits to study, not immediate composition.
And that decision just underscores his ambition. He knew he was talented, but he respected the structure of the Viennese style too much to just burst onto the scene. He devoted himself to study, working diligently under Haydn to master counterpoint.
But Haydn was a bit distracted at the time.
He was. Haydn was often busy with his trips to England, so Beethoven sought out supplementary instruction. He was very proactive.
So who were these other tutors who helped him master the craft?
Well, there was Johann Albrechtsberger, a respected contrapuntist who taught him thorough bass and fugue. And fascinatingly, he studied Italian vocal composition with Antonio Salieri.
The Salieri.
Yes, the historical figure often unfairly pitted against Mozart. And this instruction from Salieri, focusing on setting Italian texts in lyrical line, it lasted until at least 1802. He was just soaking up the entire musical ecosystem of Vienna.
So he was building his compositional muscle in private, but his public reputation was being forged in the noble salons, not the concert halls.
Precisely. His reputation was established first as a virtuoso pianist and an unparalleled improviser. The Viennese noble salons, the private homes of the aristocracy, that was his stage. And he quickly attracted powerful early patrons like Prince Karl Lichnowsky and Prince Joseph Franz Lobkowitz. These were the men who could support him financially and socially.
And the competitive nature of Vienna meant these performances often turned into something like musical sporting events, these notorious piano duels.
The duels were legendary. It was how you proved your dominance. The sources detail him winning a huge confrontation in 1799 against Joseph Wolfel.
And Wolfel was known for his technique.
Pure virtuosity.
Yeah.
But Beethoven countered him with this incredible depth and complexity in his improvisations. Then he did the same thing to Daniel Steibelt the next year.
So before the world knew the tormented composer, they knew the unstoppable athletic performer.
He was the musical athlete, yes. And he was also strategically holding back his compositions. He understood that work should be presented when they could have the maximum impact. This period formally launches in 1795 with the publication of his first works assigned an opus number, the three piano trios, Opus 1.
And this Opus 1 was a huge professional statement and a massive financial success.
The financial success was staggering. It just speaks volumes about his marketability. The profit generated from those three trios alone was nearly sufficient to cover his living expenses for an entire year.
For a whole year?
Yeah, he's financially independent, not tied to court servitude like his predecessors.
And that independence, it allowed him to push the boundaries of what was expected in the Viennese style. What are the key musical markers of this transition?
We see him moving from apprentice to master by 1799, specifically with the publication of his eighth piano sonata, the Pathétique.
Op. 13.
Opus 13. This work marked a major turning point. Musicologists use this powerful language to describe it, saying it surpassed all his prior compositions in strength of character, depth of emotion, level of originality, and ingenuity.
So he's taking the classical sonata form and just injecting it with this raw, dramatic intensity.
An intensity that was entirely new. The very title, Pathétique, evocative of suffering or passion, it signals a romantic intent.
And the scale of his ambition just kept growing. He moved from piano works to tackling the highest form of musical expression, the symphony.
In 1800, he premiered his first major orchestral work, the First Symphony. This premiere concert on April 2nd was extensive. It was a marathon of music. It had works by Haydn and Mozart, his own septet, a piano concerto, and the new symphony. It was meant to be his official coronation in the symphonic realm.
But the sources indicate that despite all the artistic ambition, the practical management was still chaotic, and that would become a theme throughout his career.
Absolutely. Yet the organization was often poor. While critics lauded it as the most interesting concert in a long time, there were clear technical failures. The sources contained specific criticism that the players did not bother to pay any attention to the soloist.
Wow.
Which indicates a lack of rehearsal discipline and maybe Beethoven's demanding, sometimes erratic style in front of an orchestra.
Professionally, he was reaching an unprecedented peak by 1801, sought after by every major publisher and patron. But then his personal life became complicated. High society romance and the terrible onset of illness.
The romances of this period were passionate, but ultimately doomed by the class system. In 1799, he met the Brunswick family and fell intensely for the younger daughter, Josephine. Then, in late 1801, he met Julie Bouchardy. He confessed his love for her, but marriage was impossible.
Because of the social distinctions. He was famous, but he wasn't nobility.
Exactly. So he channeled that doomed love into music, giving us one of his most recognized pieces.
The Moonlight Sonata.
Yes. He dedicated the Piano Sonata Opus 27, No. 2 to Julie Guicciardi in 1802. It's important to remember, he didn't name it the Moonlight. That name came years later from a critic. But the intense, almost improvisatory emotion of that first movement is certainly a reflection of that thwarted passion.
And while he's dealing with the agony of unattainable love, a far deeper physical agony begins to manifest, his hearing loss.
The symptoms of profound hearing loss and severe tinnitus began around 1798. He started writing about his difficulties in 1801, detailing the professional shame and the social difficulties it imposed on him.
What do the sources say about the cause?
It's complex. Possibilities include otosclerosis, where the bones in the middle ear harden, degeneration of the auditory nerve, maybe infectious diseases.
And there's also the modern speculation about lead poisoning.
That's right. Later analysis of his hair has shown high concentrations of lead. Now, this complicates the exact cause of death, but it certainly suggests he suffered from chronic lead exposure, possibly from his wine or from treatments administered by his doctors. And that could have contributed to the auditory nerve issues.
So regardless of the clinical origin, the effect was devastating. This wasn't just a physical ailment. It was an existential threat to his livelihood, his identity, and his ability to communicate.
Right. And it leads directly to the ultimate crisis of his early career.
This is the middle period. The crisis, the heroism, and the great shift.
This period is defined by a single, powerful resolution. Beethoven faced the loss of everything and chose to fight. And that established the foundation of the heroic musical style.
That resolution is immortalized in the Heiligenstadt Testament. Can you walk us through that pivotal year of 1802?
He was desperate. On his doctor's advice, he retreated to the small town of Heiligenstadt, just outside Vienna, hoping the quiet would help his hearing.
It didn't.
It did the opposite. The isolation just intensified his despair. And there, he wrote the Testament, this raw, unsent letter to his brothers. In it, he confessed his suicidal thoughts, his agony over the shame of his deafness, and his total social withdrawal.
So what saved him? What was the ultimate conclusion of that document?
The sheer force of his artistic will saved him. He concluded that he had to live for his art, that the world needed the music that was trapped inside him. This determination, which he reportedly expressed to a friend when he got back to Vienna, was his vow. To seize fate by the throat, it shall certainly not crush me completely.
That is the foundational mindset of the heroic period.
It is.
He returned to Vienna a man fundamentally changed, and that change manifested immediately in his music. This is the birth of the heroic style.
Absolutely. The transformation was explicit. Beethoven told his student Czerny, "I am not satisfied with the work I've done so far. From now on, I intend to take a new way."
A new way.
And this new way was characterized by composition on a truly grand scale, embracing drama, struggle, and triumphal expression. This period gives us symphonies number 3 through 8, the Archduke Trio, and his opera Fidelio.
The prototype of this new grand scale is, of course, the Third Symphony, the Eroica. It's almost double the length of any previous symphony. How did that shock his contemporaries?
The Eroica was monumental. Where a Haydn or a Mozart symphony might run 20 to 30 minutes, the Eroica stretched past 45. Its first movement alone was longer than many entire classical symphonies. Critics were just baffled.
They didn't know what to make of it.
They complained about the complexity, the lengths, they demanded it be cut, but its sheer size was deliberate. It allowed for this unprecedented thematic development and dramatic depth.
And the political drama surrounding its dedication is equally famous.
Oh, the political context is everything. Beethoven originally titled it Bonaparte. He deeply admired Napoleon as the embodiment of a heroic revolutionary ideal that defied aristocracy. He completed the work in 1804. But when Napoleon declared himself Emperor of France, betraying that republican ideal, Beethoven flew into a rage. He physically scratched out Napoleon's name on the title page so violently he tore a hole in the manuscript.
Wow.
He rededicated it simply to the memory of a great man. It was a statement about abstract heroism, not political loyalty.
The rest of the decade is essentially a continuous outpouring of this dramatic energy, and the Fifth Symphony is often cited as the epitome of this style.
The Fifth Symphony premiered in 1808, and it is the textbook example of the struggle to triumph narrative. E.T.A. Hoffmann, in his incredibly influential 1810 review, recognized this revolution immediately.
What did he say?
He hailed Beethoven as the greatest romantic composer, noting that the Fifth Symphony sets in motion terror, fear, horror, pain, and awakens the infinite yearning that is the essence of romanticism. This wasn't court entertainment anymore. It was a high emotional drama.
With the compositions becoming so vast, how did he manage the practicalities of his career? We know his income sources were varied, relying heavily on patronage.
His income stream had 3 parts: publishing, performances, and that essential patronage system. His most vital aristocratic connection was Archduke Rudolph of Austria.
And Rudolph wasn't just a donor.
Not at all. He was a serious musician and Beethoven's composition and piano student starting around 1803. The relationship was close and immensely profitable for Beethoven. He dedicated 14 major compositions to Rudolph, including the profound Archduke Trio.
Speaking of performances, the sources highlight the logistical nightmare that was his 1808 benefit concert, the one that premiered both the Fifth and Sixth Symphonies. It sounds like a spectacular disaster.
It was a fiasco of epic proportions, mostly due to the sheer amount of music attempted. It premiered the Fifth, the Sixth, the Pastoral, the Fourth Piano Concerto, and the Choral Fantasy.
All in one night.
In an unheated theater in December, lasting over 4 hours, and it was severely under-rehearsed. The sources paint this vivid picture of chaos. There were many stops and starts, and during the Choral Fantasy, a musician made a mistake, causing Beethoven to stop the entire orchestra, turn around, and shout corrections at them. Badly played, wrong again, in front of the audience before restarting.
Oh, that's incredible. The sheer strength of his genius must have overcome this chaos because shortly after, princes were fighting to keep him in Vienna.
Absolutely. His fame reached beyond Austria. In 1808, Jerome Bonaparte, Napoleon's brother, offered Beethoven a lucrative Kapellmeister position in Kassel. The Viennese aristocrats panicked.
A talent drain.
To prevent this national talent drain, Archduke Rudolph, Prince Kinsky, and Prince Lobkowitz agreed to pay Beethoven a guaranteed annual pension of 4,000 florins, just to ensure he stayed in Vienna.
That's an unprecedented level of financial support for a composer, but the plan quickly collapsed.
It did. The financial stability was short-lived, and it highlights just how fragile the Austrian economy was during the Napoleonic Wars. Rudolf paid his share, but Prince Kinsky was called to military duty and died after a riding accident, and Prince Lobkowitz went bankrupt.
But the ultimate blow was the currency itself.
Exactly. The government had printed vast amounts of paper money to finance the war, leading to massive inflation. So the promised 4,000 florins just plummeted in real value. He was constantly fighting not just fate, but bankruptcy.
Amidst all this, he also composed incidental music for Goethe's play Egmont, and the two great artists finally met in 1812. The sources depict a famously fraught encounter.
It was a massive clash of personalities. Goethe, refined and established, met Beethoven, the untamed personality. Goethe observed that Beethoven was not altogether wrong in holding the world to be detestable.
And Beethoven's take on Goethe?
He felt Goethe was too deferential to power. He complained that the poet delights far too much in the court atmosphere.
So friction, but not complete disdain.
No. Despite the personal tension, the mutual artistic respect remained. Beethoven later composed the masterful choral work setting Goethe's poem Mir still unglückliche Fahrt. Their output fed each other, even if their personalities repelled.
External political chaos also fueled specific compositions, like the Les Adieux Sonata.
The French bombardment of Vienna in 1809 directly prompted the Piano Sonata No. 26. He titled it Das liebe Wohl, the Farewell, referring to Archduke Rudolph's mandatory evacuation from the capital. The final movement, Das Wiedersehen, the Return, was even dated in the manuscript with the precise date of Rudolph's homecoming. It's music as real-time journalism.
The last major moment of this heroic period is the most famous romantic puzzle of his life, the letter to the immortal beloved.
Written in Teplitz in July 1812 is this passionate 10-page love letter to an unknown woman, which he never sent and which was discovered after his death. The mystery endures because Beethoven was so secretive about his relationships. The sources provide four main candidates.
Let's review those candidates.
Well, there's Josephine Brunswick, the object of passionate correspondence that ended in 1807. There's Therese Malfatti, who was 19 when Beethoven, who was 40, proposed marriage. She rejected him.
And isn't she connected to Für Elise?
Yes. The fascinating anecdotal detail is the possibility that Für Elise was misread by a later biographer and should have been titled Für Therese.
Okay, and the two major contenders.
Julie Guicciardi, the Moonlight recipient, is a candidate, but she married someone else. The consensus, though, supported by a lot of musicological research, leans toward Antony Brentano, a married woman who was visiting Teplitz in 1812. The correspondence suggests an intense but short-lived affair.
And the sources note that after 1812, his romantic life just vanished. It was replaced by this intense social and emotional withdrawal.
Yes, the anguish of the Heiligenstadt resolution had produced 10 years of triumph, but the personal exhaustion, combined with the economic fallout and the crushing finality of his deafness, led to a total withdrawal from the possibility of lasting emotional connection. The hero was retreating.
This next decade is a paradox. On one hand, Beethoven reaches an absolute financial and public peak with a piece of, well, light orchestral patriotism. On the other, the cost of his deafness becomes public, and his personal life collapses into legal warfare.
The period begins with a huge hit, Wellington's Victory, composed in 1813 to commemorate the defeat of the French at the Battle of Vittoria. It was originally conceived for a mechanical instrument, the panharmonicon, before being transcribed for orchestra. It was bombastic, entertaining, extremely popular.
And those charity concerts were a gold rush for Beethoven.
The financial pinnacle of his life. The concerts, which also premiered the Seventh Symphony, generated more profit than any other performances in his entire career. This cash influx allowed him to invest wisely in valuable bank shares. Those were his most stable assets at his death.
And his only opera, Fidelio, finally achieved stability and success during this financial peak.
He had struggled with Fidelio for years, revising it multiple times. In 1814, he premiered the final successful version. Everything seemed stable except his ability to perform.
Let's discuss the heartbreaking public cost of his deafness. The sources detail his final performance as a soloist in 1814.
It's a genuinely painful detail. In April and May 1814, he played in his own Archduke trio. This marked his last public appearance as a soloist. The composer Louis Storr was there and recorded the shocking reality.
What did he see?
He noted that the piano was badly out of tune, which Beethoven minded little since he did not hear it. Spohr concluded that there was scarcely anything left of the virtuosity of the artist.
To witness the greatest pianist of the era unable to perceive his own music, that must have been devastating.
It forced a complete physical retreat. From 1814 onward, he relied entirely on ear trumpets. By early 1818, his hearing loss was so serious that direct communication was impossible. This necessitated the use of conversation books. Visitors would write down their side of the conversation, and Beethoven would reply verbally.
Those conversation books are now an invaluable historical resource, but they also represent the tragedy of his isolation.
They are crucial. They record his daily life, his musical opinions, his political views. Even though his early biographer, Schindler, later admitted to destroying about two-thirds of the books, the surviving volumes give us a window into the mind of a man increasingly sealed off from the world.
And if deafness isolated him professionally, the death of his brother Caspar in 1815 thrust him into the most draining and compositionally damaging crisis of his life.
The custody battle for his nephew, Karl.
Yes.
This was a genuine war of attrition that dominated his emotional life and severely reduced his compositional output between 1815 and 1819. Caspar's will named Beethoven and his widow, Johanna, as joint guardians of 9-year-old Karl.
And Beethoven viewed Johanna with utter contempt.
He did. He saw her as an unfit mother and, in his paranoia, a morally corrupting influence. This battle was informed by his previous attempt to interfere with his other brother, Johann, trying to force him to leave his common-law wife. For Ludwig, the family's moral integrity was paramount.
So how did the legal drama unfold? What was the significant setback in 1818?
He initially won sole custody in 1816. The major setback came in 1818. Beethoven had filed the case in the Landrechte, the court reserved for nobility. When questioned by the judge, Beethoven had to admit that the van in his name did not denote nobility, it was just Dutch heritage.
So he was claiming a status he didn't legally hold.
Exactly. When the court realized this, the case was transferred out of the Landrechte and into the civil magistrate, which was a huge humiliation and legal setback. He eventually regained custody in 1820 after an intensive struggle.
And what was the result for the boy, Karl, who was at the center of all this?
Tragically, the child was a victim of this overbearing protection. Beethoven's guardianship was marked by constant interference, intense demands for perfection, and a severe lack of emotional understanding. The sources confirm that his interference in Karl's life was perceived by the boy as overbearing, and this set the stage for the tragedy at the end of Beethoven's life.
Amidst this total external and domestic chaos, composition just dropped dramatically. Where did Beethoven turn creatively during this internal siege?
He turned inward and backward. This pause became a period of intense intellectual study, which would ultimately fuel the late period innovations. He was immersing himself in the older music of the Baroque and Renaissance masters, Bach, Palestrina, and George Friedrich Handel, whom he famously called the greatest composer who ever lived.
So he was resisting modern trends and re-engaging with classical formal discipline.
He was deliberately resisting what he termed the impending romantic fragmentation towards smaller, more subjective forms. He was studying polyphony and contrapuntal structure, using it to build his own massive late style.
What are the key works that finally emerge from this painful, introspective retreat?
The output is sparser, but it signals the massive innovation to come. In 1818, he completed the Hammerklavier Sonata, Opus 106, a work of truly unparalleled scale. And in 1816, he introduced a completely new genre into the classical repertoire, the song cycle, An die Ferngeliebte.
And the sources also point to his domestic life stabilizing enough to support this creative withdrawal.
Yes, thanks to outside help. The piano workshop proprietor, Nanette Streicher, became a crucial friend, helping to nurse him and manage his notoriously chaotic domestic affairs by finding him a skilled cook. This provided the essential stability needed for the deep intellectual work of the late period.
And despite the physical decline, the world still recognized his mastery.
Absolutely. In 1818, he received a gift of a grand piano from Thomas Broadwood of London, a major sign of his enduring international esteem. Even if he could barely hear it, this recognition from across the continent was confirmation that the heroic fire still burned.
So by the early 1820s, with the custody battle temporarily resolved, the focus shifts entirely back to composition, and the sources show this final, magnificent flood of creativity.
The final years saw the completion of 3 colossal projects that had been brewing for half a decade. First, the Missa Solemnis, Opus 123. It was originally intended for Archduke Rudolph's promotion in 1819, but it became so monumental it wasn't finished until 1823.
And the sources emphasize this mass was less about institutional religion and more about a deeply personal philosophy.
It was profoundly spiritual. but highly individualistic. On one sketch, Beethoven wrote his intention, plea for inner and outer peace. It's an intellectual journey disguised as a liturgical text. He was also very shrewd in marketing it, attempting to sell manuscripts to various courts across Europe.
Next, the Diabelli variations. The ambition here was purely competitive, wasn't it?
Entirely competitive. The publisher Antonio Diabelli sent a simple waltz tune to 50 Viennese composers, including Schubert and the 8-year-old Liszt, asking for one variation each. Beethoven, with his heroic ego still fully intact, saw this as an opportunity to just demolish the competition. He didn't write one. He completed a comprehensive cycle of 33 variations, turning the trivial theme into a massive intellectual statement.
And the ultimate monument of the late period, the Ninth Symphony.
Sketches for the Ninth began as early as 1818, but it was finally completed in 1824, and its formal innovation was absolutely revolutionary.
The choral edition.
Yes. The first major example of a choral symphony, adding vocal forces in the massive final movement to set Schiller's Ode to Joy. It expanded the symphonic form beyond instrumental music forever.
What's fascinating is that Beethoven had become so paranoid about Viennese reception that he almost premiered these masterworks in Germany.
He was cynical about Vienna. He complained that the city had no time for his symphonies, that his works were out of fashion. He seriously inquired about premiering the Mass and the Ninth in Berlin. It took a passionate plea from his loyal Viennese admirers to convince him to stage the premiere locally.
The premiere on May 7, 1824, must have been an overwhelming emotional climax for him.
It was an overwhelming success, met with great public acclaim. But the tragedy of his deafness made the moment physically agonizing. Beethoven stood on stage, next to the conductor, beating time for the orchestra, completely unaware of the roaring applause at the end of the Ninth.
I've heard this story.
He had to be physically turned around by the alto soloist, Caroline Unger, to face the audience and witness the ovation. It was this powerful, silent display of triumph over his sensory isolation.
It's sad to hear that his final public concert, held shortly after, was poorly attended.
Yes, a couple of weeks later, the second concert was a financial disappointment. This setback led to a characteristic outburst of paranoia where he accused his secretary of cheating him, though they later reconciled.
Following the Ninth, he moved into his final compositional act, the late string quartets. These are arguably his most intellectually demanding and personal works.
Commissioned by Prince Nikolai Golitsyn of St. Petersburg, these 5 quartets are chamber music of unparalleled depth. When illness struck him in April 1825, the experience inspired the deeply moving slow movement of the A minor quartet, Opus 132. He titled it Holy Song of Thanks to the Divinity, from a convalescent.
These works were so radical that one of them, the B-flat major quartet, Opus 130, caused an immediate and major dispute with his publisher.
The problem was the original final movement, the Grosse Fugue, Opus 133. It was this enormous, complex, and brutally demanding piece, both for the players and the audience. At the premiere, the fugue was hated. It was simply too far ahead of its time.
So what happened?
The publisher persuaded the composer, against his initial will, to replace it with a new, easier finale. Beethoven reluctantly complied, completing this replacement finale in November 1826. It was his very last completed composition.
Which of these quartets did he himself consider his greatest?
He rated the C-sharp minor quartet, Opus 131, as his most perfect single work. It is revolutionary in its structure, comprised of 7 linked movements played without pause, creating this single, vast, seamless emotional journey.
And his very final quartet, the F major, Opus 135, contains that famous, almost philosophical question and answer.
It's the final word from the composer. The last movement is titled Der schwer gefasste Entschluss, the difficult decision. The theme is prefaced by the dialogue. Muss es sein? Must it be? Answered definitively by Es muss sein. It must be. Whether this was about a small debt or the acceptance of fate itself, it remains his final enigmatic statement.
The turbulence returned one final time, centered around his nephew, Karl.
The stress of Beethoven's overbearing demands finally broke Karl. In August 1826, Karl attempted suicide by shooting himself in the head.
He survived.
After leaving the hospital, he went to recuperate with Beethoven. But the difficult, cold journey back to Vienna in December 1826 was the final straw for Beethoven's health.
That journey marked the final decline. What were his final symptoms?
His health failed rapidly. He experienced fever, jaundice, and dropsy severe swelling of the limbs. He underwent multiple painful operations to drain the excess fluid. Karl left to join the army in early January 1827. With Karl gone, Beethoven immediately wrote a final will, making his nephew his sole heir.
Can we walk through those final poignant moments leading up to his death?
His final weeks were marked by visitors and gifts. The London Philharmonic Society sent him £100, which greatly cheered him. On March 24, 1827, he received the last rites. A case of expensive wine arrived from his publisher. He whispered his final recorded words upon seeing it. Pity too late.
And the actual moment of his death, on March 26, is captured with a touch of romantic drama.
His friend Anselm Hüttenbrenner was present and left this famous account. He claimed that at the moment Beethoven died at age 56, a violent thunderstorm broke over Vienna. There was a flash of lightning and a massive clap of thunder. Hüttenbrenner claimed this sound caused the deaf Beethoven to open his eyes, lift a clenched right fist high above his head, and look up defiantly for several seconds before falling back, dead.
The autopsy confirmed the severity of his long-term illnesses, fueling decades of speculation about the true cause of death.
The autopsy revealed extensive liver damage, highly suggestive of alcoholic cirrhosis or chronic hepatitis. Crucially, it noted considerable dilation of the auditory nerves. While his official cause of death was liver disease, the high lead concentrations later found in his hair have led many modern researchers to conclude that chronic lead poisoning, likely exacerbated by heavy drinking, significantly contributed to his suffering and ultimate death.
However tragic his final moments, the funeral was a massive public tribute.
It was an event of state. His funeral procession on March 29, 1827, was a monumental affair, attended by an estimated 10,000 people. Franz Schubert, another great talent who would soon follow him to the grave, was one of the torchbearers. It was a recognition that a giant had passed.
As we conclude this deep dive, we need to return to that intellectual framework, the three established periods. While this structure was conventionalized by his early biographers, it remains the best lens through which to view his evolution.
It really is.
And to make it clear, let's revisit the stylistic markers, starting with the first period, around 1792 to 1802, mastery and early innovation within the classical framework.
This was the mastery of the Viennese style, built by Haydn and Mozart. But Beethoven immediately began inserting radical innovations. He frequently used 4 movements in his sonatas instead of 3, and crucially, he replaced the stately courtly minuet with the scherzo.
And for our listeners, what exactly does the scherzo achieve that the minuet does not?
The scherzo, which literally means joke in Italian, is fast, highly rhythmic, and dramatic. It allowed Beethoven to introduce these extreme shifts in dynamics in tempi loud, soft, fast, slow, and use chromatic harmony in ways that the dignified minuet could never permit. It was the first sign of his expressive will pushing against classical restraint.
The middle period, 1802 to 1812, is the style of the man who seized fate, heroism and grand scale.
This is defined by emotional intensity and scale. Symphonies 3 through 8, the Archduke Trio, his major concertos. He expanded the movements and the expressive range, moving toward true dramatic storytelling and music. As we noted with the Eroica, the sheer length and emotional weight of these pieces made them revolutionary.
And finally, the late period from about 1812 to 1827, where the influence of Bach and Handel becomes audible.
This is the period of profound synthesis, characterized by intellectual depth and highly personal expression. His renewed study of the old masters led him to integrate deep polyphony, complex fugues, and even church modes, these ancient scales that lend a spiritual, timeless quality back into the Romantic repertoire. The formal innovations, like the 7-linked movements of Opus 131, show him moving far beyond the established boundaries.
The sources dedicated significant detail to his pianos, which really illustrates the tragedy of the deaf composer struggling against the very mechanism of his art.
It's the constant physical struggle. Early on, he preferred Stein pianos, then later those by Johann Andreas Streicher. In 1803, he received an exceptional Erard piano, whose resonance influenced works like the Waldstein Sonata. But once his hearing worsened, even high-quality instruments failed him.
They literally became useless to him.
Yes. He abandoned the Erard before 1810, noting it was simply not of any use anymore. The Broadwood Grand he received in 1818, despite its excellent quality, was still too soft. He tried to remodel it to make it louder. The climax of this tragedy was the custom Conrad Graf piano he commissioned in 1825.
The one with quadruple strings.
Quadruple strings and a special resonator to amplify the sound. And even this cutting-edge instrument ultimately failed to make itself audible to him. The instruments evolved, but his body betrayed him.
As we conclude, his enduring legacy goes beyond the concert hall.
His cultural footprint is immense. Museums are devoted to his journey. The Beethoven House in Bonn, the Heiligenstadt Museum, where he wrote the Testament. His importance was recognized institutionally early on. The Beethoven Monument in Bonn in 1845 was the first statue of a composer ever created in Germany. His name is synonymous with the highest aspirations of Western art.
And globally, his influence is still recognized at the highest level. The manuscript of the Ninth Symphony was deemed a document of world heritage.
In 2001, the manuscript of Symphony No. 9 became the first musical score ever added to the UNESCO memory of the World International Register. The work he finished while almost entirely deaf, the one he had to be turned around to see the applause for, is now enshrined as a document representing humanity's global memory.
So, if we step back from this deep dive, the main takeaway is this astonishing contrast between his chaotic personal life, the abusive father, the financial struggles, the agony of deafness, the toxic legal battle over Karl, and the disciplined, monumental, and emotionally triumphant nature of his finished art. He took the established forms of the classical era, injected them with the fire and struggle of his own experience, and single-handedly birthed the Romantic age.
And that leads to a profound question for you, the listener, to explore further. We know that his final greatest works, the lay quartets, the Missa solemnis, were born from an intense period of studying Baroque polyphony, forced by his social withdrawal. Could this physical loss, this enforced isolation from the outside world, have been the necessary catalyst? Did the physical decline actually push his intellectual focus inward, forcing him to engage with formal structure on a level that allowed for his greatest, most profound musical innovations? Was ultimate artistic triumph dependent on physical loss? We encourage you to listen to the fire and rage of the Pathétique Sonata and then experience the 7 linked introverted movements of the Op. 131 Quartet right next to it.
A profound thought on the relationship between suffering and creation. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the life and work of Ludwig van Beethoven.